Ryan Gosling didn't come out of the gates looking like a Hollywood juggernaut. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't an overnight success. He wasn't even particularly liked in his early years by classmates, casting directors, or in some cases, co-stars. But through sheer persistence, a freakish ability to choose the right kind of wrong roles, and an uncanny understanding of pop culture timing, Gosling carved out one of the most unpredictable careers in modern cinema. And it all began with Rambo. Yes, that Rambo. 6-year-old Ryan saw First Blood and decided not just that he liked it, but that he was Rambo. So much so that he started sneaking steak knives into school and throwing them at classmates during recess. Not imaginary ones. Real, sharp knives. This wasn't a troubled teen. This was a first grader with a death stare and a growing collection of cutlery. Naturally, school administrators weren't thrilled. He was expelled. His mother quit her job to homeschool him and keep the kid from becoming a headline. That decision, seemingly made out of desperation, saved his trajectory, because it gave Gosling the freedom to hyperfixate on the only thing he truly cared about: performance. He mimicked voices from TV. He put on little one-man shows in his living room. He studied musical routines like he was prepping for Broadway. By the age of 12, he auditioned for Disney's Mickey Mouse Club and landed the gig. Let's pause here. The Mickey Mouse Club wasn't just a fun kids show. It was a factory for fame. Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake all emerged from that same batch. Gosling, however, stood out for being the least polished of the group. He wasn't the best dancer, nor the most confident singer, but he was fearless. He had presence, and he watched people. He studied charisma like it was a school subject. Gosling wasn't born a star. He built himself into one, brick by brick, cringe by cringe. When the club ended, most of his peers exploded into stardom. Gosling, on the other hand, took a detour. He popped up in various Canadian TV shows and syndicated teen dramas. You'd catch glimpses of him in Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And even in a forgettable series called Young Hercules, where he played a leather-strapped teenage demigod with a haircut that looked like it lost a bet. These roles didn't launch him into A-list territory, but they taught him how to survive on a set, hit marks, and carry scenes with almost no help. More importantly, they gave him experience failing, publicly, cheaply, and frequently. It's hard to develop humility in Hollywood. Gosling didn't just develop it, he made it his foundation. By the time he was in his late teens, he had an important realization. If he was going to matter in this business, he couldn't outshine his peers in the traditional ways. He wasn't the most handsome. He didn't have a blockbuster physique. He wasn't a heartthrob by design. So he stopped chasing obvious success and started chasing roles that scared him. This decision would lead to one of the boldest indie performances of the early 2000s and, oddly enough, marked the beginning of Ryan Gosling's true legend. And if you're curious how a knife-throwing, denim-wearing Canadian boy became a meme, a musical icon, and a fan favorite in pink rollerblades, you won't want to miss the next chapter. Subscribe if you haven't already. Things are just heating up. By the early 2000s, Ryan Gosling had disappeared from the spotlight. Most of his Mickey Mouse Club peers were now basking in. Justin Timberlake was a global pop star. Britney was redefining MTV. Gosling, he was auditioning for grimy, low-budget indies with no guarantee of release, let alone recognition. And then, in 2001, he landed The Believer. This wasn't a flashy studio project. There were no big names attached. The budget barely covered lunch. But the story was incendiary. Gosling would play Danny Balin, a Jewish teenager who becomes a neo-Nazi. It was the kind of role that could end a career if done wrong, and cement one if done right. Everything about the film was raw. The performances, the script, the shooting style. They didn't have permits for half the scenes. Gosling was thrown onto real streets, delivering hateful, complicated monologues in front of unknowing passersby. Sometimes, they had to run from security. It was chaotic, but it was electric. What made Gosling's performance terrifying wasn't just the anger or intensity. It was the vulnerability underneath. You believe this character hated himself, even as he tried to destroy everything around him. It was a high-wire act, humanizing a monster without excusing him. And Gosling didn't just balance on that wire, he danced across it. Critics noticed. The Believer won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. Gosling's name began popping up in serious conversations. People stopped asking, "Isn't that the guy from Young Hercules?" and started asking, "Who the hell is this kid?" But here's the twist. Gosling didn't take the momentum and cash in. There was no quick turn to teen heartthrob roles. No fast-tracked, agent-mandated rom-coms. Instead, he followed up The Believer with an obscure role in Murder by Numbers, a procedural thriller where he plays a high school sociopath opposite Sandra Bullock. The movie was forgettable, but Gosling was not. It's easy to look back now and see the pattern. Gosling wasn't aiming for hits. He was collecting characters, each one darker, more damaged, more difficult than the last. He didn't want to be the poster boy. He wanted to be the guy behind the eyes you couldn't stop thinking about. And Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him. Was he leading man material? Not quite. Was he character actor weird? A little too handsome for that. He was floating in between. Too indie for blockbusters, too intense for mainstream dramas. But he liked that space. It gave him room to breathe, room to experiment. That experimentation peaked with his next truly iconic performance. One that would define romantic cinema for a generation, and ironically, turned Gosling into exactly what he had spent years avoiding, a global sex symbol. For all the dark, edgy roles Ryan Gosling pursued early in his career, it wasn't a nihilistic indie film or an art house experiment that turned him into a household name. It was The Notebook, a mainstream romantic drama that almost didn't happen, and probably shouldn't have worked the way it did. In 2004, The Notebook was adapted from a Nicholas Sparks novel, and expectations weren't exactly high. The genre had become formulaic, and the studio wasn't banking on it to make waves. Initially, the role of Noah was meant for a conventional heartthrob. Studio notes probably included words like handsome, safe, and recognizable. Director Nick Cassavetes had a different idea. He reportedly told producers, "I want someone who's not cool, someone you wouldn't expect girls to fall for." That's how Ryan Gosling got the part. The casting was a calculated risk. Gosling wasn't yet a box office name. He wasn't considered leading man material. In fact, Cassavetes called him weird-looking and meant it as a compliment. Gosling had vulnerability, unpredictability, and a face that could both ache and explode with emotion. Then came Rachel McAdams. She wasn't the first choice either. Britney Spears auditioned. So did Jessica Biel. But McAdams, another Canadian on the verge of a breakout, won the part, even though her chemistry with Gosling was, at first, a disaster. They clashed constantly on set. Gosling even asked the director to replace her. Production had to shut down briefly while the two were forced into a private meeting to work through their tension. And then, something strange happened. The tension turned electric. Their fights evolved into fire. That complicated energy, once untamed, became the core of Noah and Allie's love story. You can feel it in the film. The yearning, the resentment, the chaos. It wasn't just acting. It was real, unfiltered, messy. The Notebook opened to modest box office numbers, but grew into a cultural behemoth. The kiss in the rain, the lake scene, that it wasn't over. It still isn't over. Line, all of it entered romantic movie canon overnight. The film earned $118 million worldwide on a $29 million budget and transformed Gosling into something he never planned to be, a romantic lead. A teenage obsession, a dorm room poster god. But while The Notebook made Gosling globally recognizable, it also trapped him in a paradox. The public wanted more of that. More soft eyes, more gentle love, more sad piano scenes. But Gosling had just spent years not doing those things. He wasn't interested in being a safe bet. In fact, just as his popularity surged, he vanished. For over a year, he didn't appear in a single film. No press tours, no red carpets. When he returned, it wasn't with another tearjerker. It was Stay, a psychological thriller. It flopped, and Gosling didn't care. Because for him, The Notebook wasn't the endgame. It was a detour, a wildly successful one, but a detour nonetheless. He would eventually come to terms with the film's legacy. He even poked fun at it years later. But at the time, it made him uneasy. It was too easy, too clean, too expected. So he did what only Ryan Gosling would do after becoming Hollywood's newest romantic superstar. He found the strangest, quietest, most emotionally unstable role he could find and fell in love with a sex doll. After The Notebook exploded into the mainstream, Ryan Gosling stood at a crossroads. Hollywood was wide open. Romantic leads, action flicks, franchise deals. He could have become the next dependable studio star. But Gosling never wanted to be dependable. He wanted to be strange. And he was about to prove it by falling in love with a synthetic woman. Lars and the Real Girl was the exact opposite of what the public wanted from him post-Notebook. Released in 2007, it told the story of Lars Lindstrom, a painfully shy, emotionally stunted man who purchases a life-size sex doll and introduces her as his real girlfriend. But instead of playing it for shock or comedy, the film commits to empathy. Lars isn't creepy. He's broken. And Gosling plays him with such delicate restraint that you forget how absurd the premise is. There's no vanity in the performance. Gosling wears baggy sweaters, sports an awkward mustache, and delivers long pauses like they're monologues. Every gesture is a quiet scream for connection. In a world of actors chasing peak masculinity, Gosling leaned into fragility and made it magnetic. The film didn't shatter box office records. It barely broke $11 million. But critics were unanimous. This wasn't just an actor experimenting. It was an artist redefining what leading men could be. It was also the continuation of a pattern. A year earlier, Gosling starred in Half Nelson, a micro-budget drama about a junior high teacher addicted to crack cocaine. The film, shot on handheld cameras in gritty urban classrooms, was uncompromising. No gloss, no redemption arc, just a man drowning in his contradictions. Gosling's performance was raw, sweaty, and uncomfortably real. For it, he earned his first Academy Award nomination at just 26 years old. Let that sink in. Most actors struggle their entire careers for even one moment like that. Gosling got it early, on his own terms, in a movie that cost less than some actors' catering budgets. It sent a clear message. He could go toe-to-toe with the best, even when playing the worst versions of people. At this point, something strange began to happen. A new archetype started forming in the culture. The sad boy. The emotionally unavailable, but deeply sensitive man. The kind of guy who stares out windows. Who listens to moody jazz. Who's damaged but poetic. Gosling didn't invent it, but he perfected it. From Half Nelson to Lars, and later Blue Valentine and Drive, he became the blueprint for the 2010 sensitive anti-hero. But this reputation came with a cost. While critics applauded, audiences didn't always show up. Many of Gosling's films between 2006 and 2010 underperformed financially. Lars was adored, but barely seen. All Good Things, a dark crime drama co-starring Kirsten Dunst, vanished almost entirely, despite solid performances. The gap between acclaim and box office widened. Gosling was respected, but he wasn't a draw. And Gosling knew this. He wasn't immune to the economics of the industry. He wasn't oblivious. He just didn't care, not in the traditional sense. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing craft. So he continued making choices that confused executives but delighted directors. That's how we got Blue Valentine, shot in sequence, with Gosling and co-star Michelle Williams living together during filming to simulate a decaying relationship. The movie is a masterclass in emotional erosion. The young love scenes are sweet and spontaneous. The older ones are painful and claustrophobic. Gosling gained weight, shaved parts of his hair to look like someone falling apart, and allowed himself to be as pathetic as the role required. It was brutal to watch, but it was brilliant. Still, with all this critical momentum, one question remained unanswered. Could Gosling ever headline a hit? Could he be artful and bankable? Could he carry a film that people actually went to see? The answer came roaring in the form of a scorpion jacket, synth-heavy soundtrack, and a hammer to the skull. By 2011, Ryan Gosling had become a critic's favorite, but he wasn't a box office name. He wasn't the guy studios banked their tentpoles on. He was the guy you cast when you wanted something interesting. He was the indie darling, the sad boy messiah. But then came Drive, and nothing would be the same again. Let's get something clear. Drive wasn't meant to be a hit. It was low budget, moody, violent, and barely had a plot in the traditional sense. The script read more like poetry than screenplay. The protagonist, known only as Driver, has less than 900 words of dialogue across the entire film. That's fewer lines than some characters speak in a single Marvel scene. But what Drive lacked in words, it made up for in atmosphere. Directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, Drive was soaked in neon, silence, and blood. It wasn't a movie about fast cars. It was a movie about stillness, about tension, about the violence bubbling just beneath a calm exterior. It was Loose Samurai by way of Los Angeles, and Gosling was perfect for it. He wore a satin scorpion jacket, chewed a toothpick, and stared into the abyss like it owed him money. Every expression was calculated, every pause meaningful. He didn't act, he radiated. The jacket became a symbol, the gloves, the elevator scene, that moment with the hammer in the strip club. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Gosling, not as a heartthrob or a meme, but as a cinematic force. And it wasn't just about the aesthetics. There was real substance under the style. The film is about loneliness, masculinity, repression, and justice. It plays like a fever dream, but hits like a punch to the chest. Gosling understood that this wasn't a character you played. It was one you inhabited. So he stripped down his performance until it was almost pure energy. The result? A cult classic that performed like a sleeper hit. Made for $15 million, Drive grossed $81 million worldwide. Exceptional for something this artsy. And even more impressive was its cultural aftershock. The soundtrack, retro synthwave and melancholic electronica, exploded on streaming platforms. The film's influence bled into music videos, commercials, fashion. Everyone wanted the Drive aesthetic. No one else could quite pull it off. Gosling had officially entered icon territory. Ironically, this was also when he became the internet's favorite boyfriend. Hey girl, memes had already been circulating, but Drive turned them into gospel. Tumblr was flooded with gifs of his blank stares and brooding face. Twitter became obsessed. TikTok, eventually, made him its unofficial patron saint of lonely cool. But while the internet swooned, Gosling made another surprising choice. He didn't stay in the lane Drive created. He could have turned Driver into a franchise. Studios would have lined up for a sequel. He could have ridden that persona into a trilogy, a merch empire, a line of designer jackets. Instead, he ghosted the opportunity. No sequels, no follow-ups, just the film, the moment, and the exit. Because Gosling doesn't repeat, he reinvents. So what did he do next? He turned left into political drama with The Ides of March, opposite George Clooney. Then veered right into romantic comedy with Crazy, Stupid, Love, proving that not only could he do tension and silence, he could also do comedy and charm. He made Steve Carell cool. That's a skill. Gosling was no longer just a performer. He was a shapeshifter. He could disappear into roles, genres, moods, and somehow always feel like he belonged. But with that came pressure. With each reinvention, the stakes grew higher. And by 2013, he faced his greatest challenge yet, a streak of high-profile flops that nearly derailed everything he had built. Every career has a tipping point. That phase where an actor tests the system and the system pushes back. For Ryan Gosling, that moment came right after his biggest triumph. Drive had made him a global icon, a fashion muse, a cinematic phenomenon. But instead of doubling down on his newfound fame, Gosling did something few stars dare to do. He went darker, weirder, and almost lost it all. The first misstep was Only God Forgives, a spiritual sequel of sorts to Drive, once again directed by Nicholas Winding Refn. Expectations were sky high. Refn, Gosling, Neon, Bangkok, Revenge. How could it miss? It missed. The film is aggressively slow, almost anti-narrative. Gosling speaks even less than he did in Drive, if that's possible. The violence is brutal. The symbolism is so thick it's borderline parody. It premiered akin to loud boos and walkouts. Some critics called it brilliant. Most called it a disaster. Gosling, he stayed silent. Because in his mind, this was still the right kind of failure, bold, committed, uncompromising. The kind of film that polarizes rather than pleases. The kind that lasts in niche memory, even if it flops at the box office. But 2 flops in a row is a pattern. Enter Gangster Squad, a stylish L.A. noir featuring Sean Penn, Emma Stone, and Gosling himself as a fast-talking detective. On paper, it had everything, but it was cursed from the start. Delayed due to the 2012 Aurora Theater shooting. The film's trailer featured a movie theater shootout, then recut and restructured. The final product felt stitched together and hollow. Critics panned it. Audiences ignored it. Despite its $60 million budget, it made little impact. Then came Lost River. This wasn't just another role. It was Gosling's directorial debut, his passion project. A surreal, experimental, nightmarish vision that paid homage to David Lynch, Nicholas Reg, and fairy tale horror. He cast Christina Hendricks, Saoirse Ronan, and even his Drive co-star Ben Mendelsohn. But this wasn't a film. It was an art installation with a plot buried under layers of aesthetic abstraction. It premiered at Cannes in 2014 and was laughed at. Critics labeled it pretentious, derivative, self-indulgent. The film never saw a wide release. Gosling's directorial ambitions were crushed before they had a chance to evolve. He hasn't directed since. At this point, even fans started to worry. Was Gosling drifting too far into his own artistic headspace? Was he self-destructing in slow motion? But then, as always, he pivoted. The Nice Guys, 2016, was a buddy comedy co-starring Russell Crowe and directed by Shane Black. It was witty, violent, fast-paced, and finally gave Gosling space to flex his comedic chops. His character, a bumbling private eye with a daughter smarter than he is, was arguably his most likable to date. And the performance? Flawless. His timing, physical comedy, and chemistry with Crowe gave the film real energy. It bombed at the box office. Again, made for $50 million, it only scraped $62 million globally. Critics loved it. Audiences who saw it raved. But it never caught fire. And the message from Hollywood was clear. Gosling might be good, but he might not be profitable. Yet something was shifting beneath the surface. He was now seen as consistent, even in failure. Audiences didn't show up in droves, but they trusted that a Gosling film would mean something, even if it wasn't perfect. And more importantly, directors still wanted him. Studios still gave him room to take swings. Because when you aim high and miss, people forgive you. Gosling's great flop era wasn't a fall. It was a transition. He was burning off the last expectations of safe stardom and making room for reinvention. Again, and in 2016, that reinvention would come in the form of tap shoes, jazz, and one very yellow dress. La La Land was next. And this time, Gosling wouldn't just impress critics, he'd bring the house down. By 2016, Ryan Gosling had done it all. Indies, Oscar bait, box office bombs, cult classics, and an internet love affair that still refused to die. But he hadn't yet delivered that one performance. The one that unified critics, audiences, award voters, and streaming teens into one chorus. This guy is undeniable. That film was La La Land. Gosling was cast alongside Emma Stone, directed by Damien Chazelle, and tasked with reviving a nearly extinct genre, the original Hollywood musical. No capes, no IP, just singing, dancing, jazz, heartbreak, and dreams. It was a creative high-wire act, but Gosling walked it like he was born on the wire. He trained for months in piano, no hand doubles. He rehearsed musical numbers that demanded precision. And more importantly, he delivered a performance that was part throwback, part evolution. A man whose charm was buried under ego, and whose dreams were both beautiful and deeply flawed. The film opened at Venice and exploded. Critics lost their minds. Standing ovations. Tears. Studio execs finally saw what indie directors had known for years. Gosling wasn't just cool, he could lead. And when awards season came around, the film swept. Gosling earned a second Oscar nomination. Stone won. Chazelle won. The film tied the record for most Oscar nominations ever. And then, the envelope moment happened. You know the one. La La Land announced as Best Picture. Chaos. Correction. Moonlight wins. Gosling stands on stage, watching the producer's dreams collapse in real time, and he smirks. Not in mockery, not in arrogance, in pure, absurd disbelief. That smirk, captured in memes within minutes, became symbolic of his entire career. Because Gosling gets it. He knows how ridiculous Hollywood is. He understands how strange fame has become. He doesn't run from it. He leans in, just enough. Which is exactly how Barbie happened. When Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach began writing Barbie, they didn't need Gosling. They wanted him. He was the only choice. Why? Because Ken had to be beautiful, clueless, insecure, performative, yet deeply soulful. In other words, Pete Gosling. He read the script, laughed hysterically, and signed on. And the result? The highest-grossing film of 2023. $1 per billion worldwide. Dozens of award nominations. Countless pink memes. And a whole new generation of fans who never saw Drive or Blue Valentine, but now can't stop quoting, "I'm just Ken." Gosling leaned into the absurdity and turned it into depth. That's the trick. He played Ken with sincerity. He committed to the musical numbers, the spray tans, the fur coat. But he also gave Ken pain, desperation, and yearning. It was hilarious, and somehow heartbreaking. That's post-irony Gosling. The version of him that doesn't just embrace the meme. He inhabits it. He performs with the full knowledge that we're watching for more than just performance. We're watching for resonance, for meaning, for the moment behind the smirk. And now, Gosling is a certified A-lister again. He has The Fall Guy, a $100 million action comedy that doubles as a love letter to stunt work. He's fielding offers left and right. Studios want him. Streamers want him. Audiences, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, they all want him. Because at 43, Ryan Gosling has achieved something most actors only dream of: cultural permanence. He's no longer the guy from The Notebook, or that meme guy, or the Drive dude. He's all of them, and more. He's an actor who fails gloriously, who reinvents fearlessly, who never takes himself too seriously, but always takes the work seriously. That combination, it's rare, it's timeless, and it's why, no matter what he does next, we'll all be watching. So if you've made it this far, thank you. And if you want more stories like this, about actors who challenge the system, evolve in public, and shape the culture without selling out, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember, being just Ken is enough if you're Ryan Gosling.